Well, I'm joined now by the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb. So a big day for students. They finally got an answer. They've waited 7 weeks after being told their exams were cancelled. So how's this going to work?
Well, the teacher will devise the grade. It's teacher-assessed grades. The teacher will look at a range of evidence of the student's work over the last 2 years. There'll be quality assurance processes in place in the school. The grades will be signed off by the head teacher. They'll be submitted to the exam boards on the 18th of June. There'll be quality assurance processes in place by the exam boards. They'll have a sample of schools that go and check those grades to make sure there is the evidence that supports them. And there'll be a risk-based sampling as well. And the results will be announced on August the 10th for A-levels and August the 12th for GCSEs and their equivalents. And there'll be a very robust appeal process for those students that are not happy with their grades. But given that students will know the type of evidence that the teacher will be using on which to base their grade, we hope that any problems will have been resolved at a school level a long time before the grades are submitted.
Let me read you a quote. By doing away with all moderation, it would be misguided and create deep inequalities. Without moderation, there would be grade inflation of 12 percentage points at A-star and A, casting doubt on the validity of the grades in the eyes of employers and university. That was yourself a year ago saying exactly that this new system would lead to great inequalities.
Well, we do think that exams are the fairest system, and we were determined to keep exams. But when it became very clear in January that we were restricting access to schools to all but the vulnerable children and children of critical workers, given the disruption that students had faced over the year, the only fair system was to move away from an exam this year to a teacher-assessed system. And we have built in very protective measures. We trust the judgment of professionals who run our schools, but on top of that, we have these quality assurance processes to make sure that there is a process at the school level to ensure that the grades are a fair reflection of the attainment of the students. And then there's that other quality assurance by the exam boards. There's also very detailed guidance that's will be produced by the exam boards and detailed training for teachers in how to submit those exams. So there's a whole raft of measures to make sure that the grades are a fair reflection of the work and the ability of students.
But if you're saying that exams are the best thing, are you basically saying that this plan is the best of a bad bunch?
I'm saying it's the best we can do other than exams. And exams this year wouldn't be fair because of the different levels of disruption that students have faced across the country. So this is the best system. And we trust the professionalism of teachers and head teachers. We consulted very widely on the 15th of January for 2 weeks on the basis of these details. And 100,000 responses, half of whom were students. This method has achieved widespread support in the sector, including from the heads of some of the big unions, Jeff Barton and so on, has been very supportive of these measures. We've worked very closely with the schools, with the regulator, with the exam boards, to make sure that we put together the best possible method of ensuring fairness and to ensure that students can move on to the next phase of their life. We don't want any student to suffer long-term damage to their prospects as a consequence of this pandemic.
But you're saying it is essentially a compromise. It's not what you would like to do. You're putting all your faith in the hands of the teachers, but you didn't want to do that last year. I wonder what's changed. You know, have you suddenly had a revelation that teachers are quite capable of monitoring their own pupils?
Well, we put in place, as I said, these quality assurance processes with very detailed guidance from exam boards to make sure...
Teachers, sorry to interrupt, but you're essentially asking teachers not only to judge their pupils, but you're asking them to judge their pupils against other schools and against the rest of the country. How on earth can teachers be expected to do that?
Well, teachers are very experienced and they will know from previous years what the standard that a particular student has reached. Given the disruption that they have faced, they will only look at the work where that element of the curriculum has actually been taught. There are those quality assurance processes in place at the school level, and there'll be very detailed guidance from exam boards about how to judge that, how to judge students and how to create that range of evidence to support the grades that are being submitted.
It seems like last year you were saying we can't trust the teachers, it must be an exam. And teachers' words were totally ignored when it came to saying, look, this pupil's perfectly capable of getting this grade and you've awarded them a much lower grade. And now it seems you're saying, right, teachers are going to have all the responsibility and quite frankly, if it gets messed up this year, we can blame them.
No, look, one learns from what happened in last year. And we've worked very closely for many months on even when the schools were open and we were expecting exams to go ahead, we were working on a contingency in case we had to cancel exams because of further disruption to children's education. We've worked closely with the exam boards, we've worked closely with the school sector, with teachers, head teachers. Every step of the way we've consulted to make sure that we can devise a system that's as fair as possible for students. They can move on to the next stage of their lives. But you're right, of course, exams are the fairest and best system of judging attainment. But we can't have exams this year because of the pandemic and because of the disruption that many students have faced up and down the country. It wouldn't be fair to hold exams this year. And we trust professional teachers are the people that know their students best. And we do trust their professionalism. And we can make sure that students get it.
But academics are questioning this system. Natalie Pereira from the Education Policy Institute says there's a really high risk we'll see inconsistencies in the grades among different pupils and schools, and a significant risk that schools will take very different approaches to grading. It could result in larger numbers of pupils appealing their grades or extremely high grade inflation. It's going to lead to chaos in the summer again, isn't it?
No, look, all these risks that the EPI are talking about are all risks we're all fully aware of. Of course, this is not the ideal situation to be in. This is a consequence of the pandemic, but it is the fairest system given the different levels of disruption students have faced. And of course, we are aware of all those issues that think tanks and other people
have been let down over the last year repeatedly. And you're now telling them, well, look, you've got to jump through these hoops. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can come up with. And it's taken us 7 weeks to come up with it.
Well, we were working on this before Christmas. We were able, once schools were announced that schools were not going to be open to most students on the 4th of January, we were ready to consult with the details of this on the 15th of January. So we've been very prepared for been working on this for many months. It is the fairest system. We want to make sure that students continue to study. So the exam grades won't be submitted until the 18th of June. That gives more months of face-to-face teaching as schools are going back on the 8th of March. We want to do everything we can to help students deal with the consequences of this pandemic. The pandemic, it has caused all kinds of disruption to children's education. That's what's driven this. And what we're doing as a government is trying to make up for that by all the measures we announced yesterday about the catch-up, the recovery premium, and that builds on all the catch-up funding, the £1 billion that we announced earlier this year, and the one-to-one tuition and so on. We want to make sure that no pupil, no student suffers long-term damage to their prospects as a consequence of this pandemic. And one of the things we need to do is to make sure that they get grades, they get their qualifications this year so they can move on to college, to university, to an apprenticeship, and not have that process, that progress disrupted by this pandemic. And that's what this system does. It's the fairest system that we could devise. We've worked very closely with teachers and with the education sector in devising it. It's had widespread support when we consulted, including 50,000 students who've responded to the consultation.
What about Sir John Coles from Ofqual? I don't know if you've heard, but there are reports this morning that he has resigned. Can you confirm that?
Well, he resigned a little while ago when one of the committees that he was on was going to be was no longer needed. Look, I respect Sir John Coles very much indeed. He runs an effective multi-academy trust, and he has his
quote to you. He said the government's desperate not to be. Our viewers might not, though. The government's desperate not to be accused of having an algorithm or exams by the back door, focusing on this rather than the actual goal. How are we going to be fair to young people? We risk an outcome in August much worse than last year. What do you make of that?
So he thought that the exam materials that we're making available to teachers, the question bank that they can use as part of the range of evidence that they'll need to supply to exam boards about how they've devised the grade, he wanted that to be compulsory, mandatory. We asked that question in the consultation: should those materials should they be an option for teachers or should they be mandatory? And the consultation was very clear that they should be an option and not mandatory. We didn't want those materials to be regarded as a mini exam, because we've cancelled exams this year because they were felt to be unfair given the disruption. So we didn't want to then cancel exams and replace them with another exam. But that, John is entitled to his views, but the majority of people in the sector, including the heads of the major unions such as Ofqual, believe that we have devised the best possible method given the circumstances. It's fair.
Okay.
There are quality assurances and checks to make sure that those grades do reflect the work of the students. There'll be a robust appeal process, and we've got an autumn season series in case students are not happy. They can take the exams in the autumn if they wish to do so.
You mentioned the summer schools. Who are going to run these? Because the teachers, as well as now having to learn a whole new system and mark all these exam papers, have been teaching some students at school, some online. They are, quite frankly, knackered. Who on earth is going to run these summer schools?
Well, we want them run from the schools. But the reason why there's funding is to enable the schools to be able to employ people to take part and run those summer schools. We want a summer of activity.
Who is qualified to teach our youngsters apart from teachers?
Well, there are a whole raft of people that will be able to come in, young graduates, people who are training to be teachers, retired teachers. That's a matter for the school to decide, but we are providing £200 million to enable schools to run those summer schools, and that's on top of all the other measures. The £1 billion we've distributed to schools to provide catch-up, the national tutoring programme, 33 tutoring
very
companies
briefly, because we only have a few seconds left, but how are you going to ensure that the right people, the right children get this, and it's not just the parents with the sharpest elbows, that it's actually the children who've missed out who actually get this help?
No, we're giving guidance to schools to focus these resources to students, the most disadvantaged students who have suffered the most during the pandemic, to help them to catch up. There's a whole raft of measures, as I've said, the National Tutoring Programme, the academic mentors, the premiums that we've given to schools to help to fund this. We've also appointed Sir Kevin Collins to look at, for the slightly longer term, about how we can ensure that students that need to catch up over a period of months and years, that we have measures in place for those students as well, and we'll be listening to what Sir Kevin has to say about how we can do that. We are determined that no student will suffer that long-term damage to their prospects as a consequence of this pandemic, and we're backing that determination with £1.7 billion over this period to make sure that every student will be able to catch up. And today's announcement about how we're going to make sure every young person has their qualification, despite the fact we've had to cancel exams. It's a fair system, and it does mean they'll be able to go on to the next phase of their career.